Chattanooga, Tennessee, David Tulis.
The city in Texas of Sharpstown has closed its police department and is enjoying a reduction in crime. Well, another way of putting that is that it is enjoying a reduction in prosecutions for crimes which previously had been enforced and prosecuted by the Corporation Department of Police, the executive branch agency. We have here in Chattanooga we have tripartite city governments. These corporations all have three parts: executive, legislative, and judicial. They all have city courts and city councils or commissions, and then mayors, who are the executive leader of the city or dictator of the city, and execute the ordinances and some limited number of statutes, state statutes as well. Sharpstown decided it didn't need a police department, and then it fired everybody, and then it hired private people to chase down real criminals. And these people who are a part of serving a corporation don't have special privileges and don't have licenses to kill, as do here in Tennessee and Chattanooga, as do police departments, which in the fact that they have a uniform and can issue peremptory commands, they have, if you don't comply, they will escalate their use of force and ending in death. That is the lethal force, where, of course, their lives are threatened, and they feel someone else might be threatened in his life, and so they will fire for effect. Now, this was back in 2012. It's been 5 years, and the company engaged by Sharpstown was SEAL Security Solutions. And in the first 20 months, according to the truthfight.com report, crime was down 61% in the first year and a half. The man who directs that company says, since we've been in there, an independent crime study that they've had done indicates we've reduced the crime by 61%. This is according to a report earlier in guns.com. All of that, and they don't have any special rights that you or I don't have. The writer of this piece says that means they can't arrest for misdemeanor crimes, only for felonies. And that is, of course, is an authority that you, my listener, have. You have recognized in the Tennessee law. You have arrest authority. Now, you would not arrest someone for a paper crime, for a victimless crime, or one that involves some pretended offense against state government. You would only arrest someone if there was a murder or a rape or a robbery, something that was clearly a violation of a biblical law or a common law, good sense right that the victim had. The story says that the engaging of this private company, not a police department with police powers under Texas statute, has saved the town $200,000 a year, and it also, according to James Alexander, the director of operations of the SEAL Security Solutions business, says that we go out on patrol, and we patrol those areas where there are known crimes, or where there's a temptation for people to gather for criminal activity that would be of a felonious nature. That would be fighting and injuries, assaults, things of that kind. That would be maybe certain areas where there are warehouses and strip joints and taverns and the like, where people congregate, and often have a ruckus with the loss of life and property. This is David Tulis, who argue here for privatization. Now, the problem is that you have by Mike's count, the problem, Confederate Mike's count, is that you have private people enforcing the statute. How are they governable under the law if they're enforcing the law? Well, don't forget that the people who are peacekeepers are enforcing common law, the common law offenses, and those are offenses that are obvious to anyone, clear wrongs. That would be a beating, an assault, a robbery, a theft, a burglary, a murder, or a rape. These are universally understood to be crimes, and they don't have to be written up in the Tennessee Code for you to know that they're wrong, right? They're simply wrong. And we all have that authority to make an arrest, a citizen's arrest, in the same in Texas. Well, this is David Tulis. We're arguing for loving your neighbor, buying local, and local economy and the free market. I argue that near is better than far, that small is much, much better than big in the final analysis, and also that simple is better than complex. And the good people in Washington and Baltimore, New York, and Chicago, where the futures markets are, they argue differently. They argue that we need to have superior active government, and that there needs to be an executive branch, there needs to be a legislative branch, because we don't have enough things being executed, and we don't have enough laws. Just don't have enough laws. We need to have some more. And Roy Moore, speaking of more, Roy Moore is seeking the federal Senate post and is facing remarkable accusations. And when I hear the tearful presentations of the women claiming to be victims, the woman who said he sexually abused her in a parked car outside in the dark shadows behind a restaurant by the dumpster, she said, I have the thought that one's sins will find one out. That is always a truism in Christianity. There is no secret sin, especially of course from God. Every sin has God as the first offended party, and many sins, though, especially those that enter into the realm of crimes that are prosecutable by the authorities, they are sins as well, and they have victims, and they're not just God privately is the victim. Say of a man with a porn addiction, he can't have access to God. God will not reveal himself to him. He will not hear that man's prayers. It is a sin against God directly, and there doesn't seem to be, at least outwardly, a victim, except of course his wife. But that's not really actionable as a crime. But here we have Roy Moore accused again now by another tearful woman just a few weeks before the election, and all we can think of is this remonstrance in Christianity that really before God nothing is secret, and in many ways, in many areas, depending on the sin or crime involved, there may well be a finding out among men. There's a story that I think is worth noting. We had in Chattanooga 20 years ago an abortion clinic, Chattanooga Women's Clinic, that by God's grace was closed in bankruptcy. The Presbyterian owner of that property, renting to Chattanooga Women's Clinic Incorporated, protected by the police department, protected by the sheriff's department and statute, and the custom that we have averring that judicial opinions out of Washington are in fact law. I speak there, Roe v. Wade, right? 1973, Roe versus Wade, that pretended to deny the states the ability to enforce their statutes protecting the unborn. We had a clinic. I don't think ever that people in religion were so bold as to have a blessing event there, as a clinic in Texas has, according to the TexasObserver.org. There's a narrow hallway in a photograph. It looks like something in a prison, and you have two women ordained with clerical collars. The little black collar with a little white square at where the Adam's apple should be there on the clergy person. Faith leaders at the Whole Women's Health Clinic in Fort Worth. The photo courtesy of the baby killing center, and there is a discussion about the right of these women to bring about fetal demise and to pray over that, and there are progressive people of faith even in Texas, says Cantina Washington-Leaphart, director of program for reproductive justice and sexuality education at the Religious Institute. We're trying, say, the extreme right's narrative, is missing word there, I think, isn't the only narrative related to faith, says Washington-Leaphart, a main organizer of the event. Women seeking an abortion are largely women of faith. They're not having an abortion in spite of their faith. It's in many ways informing the decision they make. They have a God-given right to make decisions about their life. The Fort Worth Clinic was chosen for the event in part because many of its patients are people of color who often face larger obstacles to reproductive health care. Washington Leaphart said, when thinking about access, we have to think about how race and class impact access. You really want to have black people, in her perspective, free to destroy their children without inhibition, without any obstacle. And we certainly don't want to have God and his requirements for the protection of the innocent to be a barrier to the exercise of their rights, especially if they're black. The clinic event comes one day after the final day of a trial challenging Texas's D&E abortion ban. Whole Women's Health is a plaintiff. So we have an effort to bless this, the hallways and doorways and door handles and the forceps and the vacuum cleaner on button and of course the off button when the baby parts are sufficiently vacuumed out. Turn that thing off. It's very noisy. It disturbs the woman who's made somewhat tranquil there in the stirrups during the slaughter of her black child. And blessings, well, we want to have blessings all about. I'd say Chattanooga is blessed because we don't kill babies like we used to. And I think that there, in the 20 years of blessing, the 2 decades of blessing, there are many, many strong points about this city. And I'm glad that you have called. And the number here is 800-8949, and I do appreciate your call, 800-8949. Caller, what's on your mind? David Tulis.
Interesting topic, David. You know, I changed my position on, because I call you all the time, on killing unborn babies a while back. And I may have to try to convince you to see my position, because I want you to look at the bright side of killing unborn children, okay? So there's always a bright side to everything. If we can show that there's liberals, progressive socialists, and Democrats doing it, the chances are they're going to breed more liberals, socialists, progressives, and Democrats. So if the ones, I think maybe we should give them a stipend, like for every unborn baby a liberal or Democrat kills, maybe give them $100.
Well, probably the grant should be more. And maybe if we reduce the identification requirements on the application, you might have even more. You know, maybe 200, maybe 250.
Well, why don't we just, you know, I don't know, do they need, like, when you go to get your driver's license, they need a driver's ID, and then they need a Social Security card, and maybe a passport. They need any special identification to kill your unborn child? Well, or is it just you walk in and they set up the vacuum cleaner and it's done?
Well, these are good questions, Mike, and maybe there's another listener out there who wants to answer that question.
Okay, all right. So I propose giving stimulus checks to any Democrat, liberal, or socialist that wants to take the life of their unborn. Okay, thanks. Bye.
Okay. Well, Mike is having a bit of revelry there, and I do appreciate your calling. This is David Tulis, and we are live at Nooganomics Radio, and the number is 800-8949, 800-8949. I was mentioning a moment ago, and I've had some work done at Nooganomics.com urging a reform that would save us millions of dollars in taxes and end the jail crowding problem. And that is an enforcement of a statute that is is called the mens rea statute. And that what that means is mens rea is simply Latin for guilty mind or culpable intention. And in Tennessee law at Title 39, there's a requirement that every case that is criminal in nature, even a misdemeanor, that there is an accusation that the accused intended to violate the law. And I'm proposing that judges Tom Greenholst, Don Poole, and Barry Steelman in criminal court insist on this provision of Neil Pinkston. And also, well, he can't ask that requirement anymore from Rodney Strong, who's leaving the DA's office, a longtime prosecutor, a longtime member of the Order of the Finger, the Fraternity of the Finger, the accusing body that begins with the police officers who are there to enforce statute with maybe some legal warrant. And the reason I bring it up is there was a fine essay about the ignorance of the law. And it should be that if you didn't know the law, you can't be accused under it. Because after all, there are so many laws, especially federal ones. Do you know that if you give someone a password and allowing access to a computer without authorization, there can be a criminal case filed under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, according to Clark Neely at Foundation for Economic Education. That's fee.org, FEE.org, a great website to which you should subscribe. There is a ruling out of the Ninth Circuit that password sharing could be prohibited by the act. And the dissent noted that the lack of any limiting principle means that the majority's reasoning could easily be used to criminalize a host of innocent conduct. Now, innocent conduct is innocent if there's not mens rea, right? If there's not culpable intent. One rationale, he says, for the maxim that ignorance of the law is no excuse was to give people an incentive to educate themselves about legal requirements. However, it's a laughable thought when you consider the number of rules and laws that are out there. There's so many of them, they become so complicated. And as he says, the relationship between law and morality is so attenuated, right? So weak that those supporting rationales no longer make sense. There have been multiple attempts to count the number of federal crimes, including by the Justice Department, and no one has yet succeeded in finding the total number. Title 18 of the U.S. Code, which governs crimes and criminal procedure, has 6,000 sections, okay? And it's estimated that there are more than 4,500 federal crimes and 300,000 federal regulations with criminal penalties. And of course, he says this does not include the dizzying array of state and local criminal codes, ignorance of which is practically assured, but still not excused. And he mentions some ridiculous examples of what's called strict liability crimes. We don't have strict liability crimes in Tennessee, but in Hamilton County, the prosecutor's office, the judges in Sessions Court as well, and also the defense bar pretends that Title 39-11-301 does not exist. The requirement for culpable mental state, it's a defense, okay? Just like necessity is a defense when you are accused. I think you, my listener, need to pay attention to this line of discussion, because you face arrest, okay? You are going to be arrested, and you are going to be charged at some point. Bobby Unser, of course, the race car driver, has a plot. He was convicted of illegally driving his snowmobile in a national forest wilderness area in 1996. He and a friend were stranded in the mountains during a blizzard. They had to take shelter in a barn. They were suffering hypothermia, and reconstructing their meandering path in whiteout conditions, prosecutors concluded that they had strayed onto federal land and convicted Unser of the misdemeanor crime of operating a snowmobile in a national wilderness area. Even people attempting to perform virtuous acts have been prosecuted by regulators. In 2009, Robert Eldridge, a fisherman from West Chandler, Massachusetts, faced a $100,000 fine and a year in jail as he tried to free a humpback whale that had been caught in his fishing gear and escaped. He escaped with only a $500 fine because he did what? He pleaded guilty, right? He copped a plea. Allison Capo faced a year in prison more recently after her daughter rescued a federally protected woodpecker from the family cat. The two were apprehended by a U.S. Fish and Wildlife officer who overheard them talking about the bird while shopping for a suitable container at a Lowe's home improvement store. Keep your mouth shut. Her initial fine of $535 was rescinded finally by the agency that claimed it was a clerical error. So there has to be a sense in which this law on the federal side is restrained. And ask yourself if Chuck Fleischman, the incumbent federal representative for this area, cares about this issue. I don't think he does, and probably not his pro-Obamacare Democratic challenger. We have to have restoration of sanity, a restoration, I suggest, of a biblical perspective on law, and the idea of having an explicit and a clear guilty mental state as being part of the case, that will limit prosecutions, right? That will limit the police state. Limit the police state, insist on the biblical argument of mens rea. That's an argument that Christian people, I think, who claim to love God, right? They claim to love the Bible. They claim to love the Ten Commandments. Let them be the first people to raise this point up. Let them be the ones who form a committee and say, we want judicial reform in Chattanooga, and let's start right here. Let's start right here. Just look at the many offenses for which people have been arrested in the past day. Go to Chattanooga.com, for example, and look at the lockup report. Many of those cases it can't be proven that there was any intent. So chop that number down by 80%, 90%, and have just the real crimes, the wife beating, the larceny, and things like that. Have them prosecuted, but not many of these others, which they simply can't be prosecuted with that standard in view. This is David Tulis, Nooganomics.com.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio, digital FM 95.3.